So, hi everyone. Welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. We took a little break in August, but we're back with September with a really great lineup for the rest of the year. So, I hope you're going to stick around for all of that. Today, I've got with me Deane Barker, who is the Director of Strategic Engagement at Staffbase. That's a global provider of internal communication technology. Deane, if you're in content management, you know Deane because he talks a lot and he has a lot to share. Over 25 years, and he's written 4 books about the patterns and practices of modeling, creating, and managing and delivering content. Two of the books that we talk about a lot: Web Content Management Systems, Features and Best Practices. That's it with O'Reilly Media, and then the Web Project Guide, which I remember reading about when we were putting it out piece by piece, Deane, from Spark to Launch and beyond. So thank you for being with us today, Deane. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I looked back, Barb, and we did Content Matters in 2019.
Yeah, I think you were like first or second guest.
I think I was the first guest of 2019. So 6 years, you do a great job. And 6 years later, she invites you back.
Yep. Thank you. Oh, and also with us, you'll see, is David Hillis, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Ingeniux. And he likes to call himself a tech optimist who's passionate about how AI is transforming the web and customer experience. Dave and I work together a lot, and I can tell you he is elbow, neck, whatever deep into this AI stuff and how it's kind of changing the way we work. It's really interesting to talk to him about that. But Dave has got over 2 decades of experience with the world's largest brands to build websites and digital platforms. And today he's with Ingeniux and Discover CX by Ingeniux. His focus is on helping organizations move beyond static page-based websites towards intelligent AI-powered experiences. And that is the perfect segue into the stuff that we're going to talk about today, which is redefining the CMS for the AI era. And I know that both of you have lots of ideas and insights and things, the way you kind of think things should be or might be going forward. And so this is kind of, for me, as much a fact-finding mission because I'm curious to know what's happening with the CMS in the future. And actually even today, because a lot of the CMS vendors are doing different things and they're not all kind of working the same way. So I think it's going to be a really good conversation with the both of you. So, okay. Do you want to just kick it off? We'll kick it off with probably not an easy question, but we'll kick it off. The content management system is never really a content creation tool. You basically create your content somewhere else and you put it in the tool. So if it's not, so that makes it more of a content production tool. You manage the content, you publish it somewhere, and it's done. So that kind of talk or that kind of idea of the CMS is kind of going away. And you're seeing that with a lot of the digital experience vendors out there who are talking about that kind of stuff not being important anymore. So is it then just a repository? And if it's really a repository, what is it a repository of today? And Deane, I'll kick that off with you to start. And then, but you guys, great conversation.
I'll interject real quick. I think what kind of spurred this conversation was that fantastic article that Deane wrote about the queen bees, and is the CMS becoming a repository? So, definitely like to anchor a bit there because I thought it was a really interesting take on content management. So I know not everybody on the podcast has read that article most likely, but it'd be great to kind of get a recap from your perspective, Deane, on what your thoughts were there as well.
I was trying to figure out a way to put my thoughts together in this. When I write, I tend to write a lot of words, and sometimes I don't think I get to the point enough. And I wrote that article about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and I've been thinking about it since then. And the nature of content management is really an attempt at generalization, right? Before we hit CMSs, we were building bespoke databases and apps for everything we did. But then one day we were like, holy cow, I've done this so many times. Let me just generalize this. And you have a system like Ingeniux, for example, which allows you to generalize a specific problem, right? Ingeniux is a wrapper that can wrap around a specific problem and apply common patterns to it. AI is reducing the cost of custom development. I'm not saying it's bottoming it out, because I think AI is just a magnifying glass. If you're a good developer, it'll make you better. If you're a bad developer, it'll make you worse. But it's reducing the cost of custom development. It's reducing the overhead and the technical debt involved with custom development. It's making it much easier to create smaller utilities and tools that apply value to data.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, what really becomes the CMS, right? If you could snap your fingers and get a data management tool for any type of data, would you need a generalized system at all? I mean, the reason why we generalize systems is so we didn't have to keep writing specific systems.
Yeah.
But if you take away the overhead, the workload, the effort in writing a specific system, what's the value of the generalized system, and really what becomes of the CMS at that point? And what I said in the article was that I believe that the core of a CMS is the content model, is the definition of how you intend to use your content, how you're defining your types and your properties. And we need to find a way to get AI to operate on our content in the context of those content model. I followed up the Queen Bee's article with this ridiculous experiment I did. I did this long running, if you read that, it's like a 20-minute read. What I did was I took a SQLite database and I attempted to use it as a content management repository. So I defined very, very strictly. In fact, I had to go learn a bunch about SQLite. Had to very, very strictly define a particular content model. And then I sicked AI on it in like 6 different ways. And I said, write this, give me an editing UI, give me a batch process, give me a static site generator, all based around that content model. And the results were pretty good. I mean, they were a little bit rough, but I didn't put a whole lot of time into it. But what I did was I talk about repositories being well described and well defended. If you create a repository that is well described, meaning you have a rich description of what you plan to do with your content, and it's well defended, meaning you have constraints in place so an AI engine can't do stupid things with your content, then it's okay just to use AI to create temporary, even disposable interfaces to work with that content. I'm going to pause there. David, you read the article. I'd love to get your impression on the article and what I just said.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack in what you just talked about. You know, I mean, part of the article I was reading, as a shameless plug, it sounded like you're describing Ingeniux CMS in some ways, because we've been kind of probably one of the products that have leaned most into structure and repository. But, you know, there's also a lot of the headless products do that in spades. And, you know, I've also been kind of evolving my thinking about, you know, what that means as well. I mean, one thing I really kind of struck me was like what Webflow did, where they took part of their content model, and, you know, so this was CMS content, and that was really well structured. Then they have this unstructured content type, which is like the visual design content. And then they have reusable components, you know? So to me, that kind of seemed like, okay, that kind of seems right, because not all content is repeatable content structure patterns, right? And in fact, you know, is content structure the enabler, or is it the, you know, kind of gate to doing what you want? And I use that as a way to think about, you know, using AI to generate digital experience, web experience. Because the one thing, and I've done a lot of work, kind of like you, experimentation, building stuff, trying to find the right patterns and models. And one of the things is, once you kind of define, these are my front end inputs, right? This is my markup that I'm using for different types of display. Changing those is a prompt, or not even a prompt. I mean, I would say it's a statement, right? Use this template. And the template, you know, a lot of times design drives structure as well, right? Because you have to basically populate design from structure. You've got to pull the content from somewhere and populate it into the page. And then to me, it's like, okay, well, then the rigid model we based content management on for the past 20 years, which was, here's their content definition. And it has all these different, properties and types and content types. That's an enabler in some cases, and in some cases, when you're changing your front end so fluidly, it doesn't always fit. You get kind of that round, whole square peg problem as well.
So I had this conversation with a friend a few years ago about how flexible and changeable content models should be, kind of on the fly. He was a big proponent of using a headless CMS and letting your editors change the content model to do what they need. Like if they want to put something, the example I always use is if they've decided that on a blog post, they want to show the mood that the author was in when they wrote the blog post. So were they happy? Were they sad? So they need a new field for mood, and it needs to be a string field that needs to be required. Do you let your editors do that, or do they have to go to a developer to kind of get that done? Traditionally, there was an administrator or a developer that would then make that change in the CMS to allow them to store that data.
Yeah.
His argument was you should let editors modify the models on the fly. Now, this takes on new resonance in the world of AI because some CMSs have really embraced that from a modeling standpoint. Dries from Drupal did an event in Barcelona late last year where he showed the new Drupal CMS. It was Project Starshot. It's now Drupal CMS. And it has an AI interface. And he showed just an editor typing, add an image to this, and then move the image field up. And the image can't be more than 300 pixels across. And so the editor was just able to like fluidly define the content model on the fly to match what they were trying to do. Now, in one sense, that's very powerful. Like I looked at that and I was pretty amazed. I was really impressed with what he was doing there. But the developer in me is half terrified because you have to ask yourself, like, what is the inviolate core of your CMS or your content? Like, how far do you let AI infiltrate back? To me, it's the model. It doesn't get into the model because that's where I draw the line. Like, I don't retreat any further than the model. But as I said in the Queen Bee's post, maybe I'm just middle-aged and resistant to change. I don't know. I mean, maybe this is the future of where it should go. I mean, what do you think, Dave? Do you think editors should be able to modify models on the fly?
Well, here's, I think, two important points about that. Kind of the point I made about Webflow before, where they kind of unpacked the content model or decoupled it, I guess, where you have a blog post, product listing, things like that. Those are rigid. You follow the model for those. And then some content types, like a landing page or more of a free form page. I think that structure is less important. The problem that as you get into is the governance problem, right? It's the 0 to 1 and the 1 to 10,000. So 0 to 1, fine, change your model. But you already have 5,000 pages following a certain model, and all of a sudden you introduce a new element into that. Are you then going back and, refreshing or evergreening the past content? Or are you just kind of adapting and moving forward? So you do get, a bit of a governance issue as you keep fluidly adapting models in terms of, the entire structure. And then a lot of times, content management systems provide logic layers that pull back content based on certain metadata or certain properties on the page. And then if those items, start changing, then you start breaking a lot of logic as well. So
this
from a developer perspective, that's the problem, right? It's like you don't know, the editor doesn't know what's dependent upon that field or what the intention is in terms of the large web scale out of that content. So I guess my short answer is that there's a lot of context and nuance to that, and sometimes fluidity is a valid approach, and sometimes you need to live by the rules, right? So
AI is interesting because it's going to enable us to do more things faster. And, the AI as a magnifying glass is true. If you do something stupid, AI will let you do something stupid at scale, right? Editors, like never before, are going to be able to pull the trigger on large scale changes. Before, like some changes that an editor would make would be limited simply by UI friction. There would be a lot of clicking and moving around. Well, if you take away that UI friction, you give them the opportunity to do anything they want.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you said, Dave, about if you change things, you may break functionality because there's systemic functionality that depends on certain aspects of the model. I've often wondered, and God knows I'll probably write something about this in the future, but I've often wondered if the future of AI might be a two-stage content model, meaning there's a systemic content model, which is inviolate, cannot be changed.
Yeah.
Then layered on top of that is what I would call an editorial content model, which AI can change this. So if I have, for instance, a blog engine, I'm using a super, super simple example. The systemic content model is going to be title, date, because those are the two properties I absolutely have to have, right? I'm driving my aggregations off the date. I have to have a title to show something. Maybe URL slug. I mean, that's the absolute inviolate. You can't change those or the site is literally going to break. But then the editorial content model are all of the properties that an editor can use AI to mess with. So if my editor says, I want to track the mood I was in when I wrote this blog post, AI would then add that to the editorial content model. And the effective content model that the site runs on is a conflation of the two. So it's essentially a superset of the two. They can change the editorial model. They can do it. It's kind of like a sandbox. It's like when you take, this is going to be a terrible analogy, but it's like when you take a toddler and you put them in their playpen, they can do whatever you want. And as a parent, you don't really care because you know that they're safe in there. And anything that was in there was designed to be broken or eaten or shoved up a nose or whatever, right? So this is what we're doing. The editorial content model is the playpen. And as a developer, man, I don't care. Go nuts, do whatever you want, but don't touch the date and don't touch the title. And those are in the systemic content model for a reason. Mm-hmm. I think two-stage content models, there might be some legs there.
I think that's a really interesting approach. And and then the other thing I wonder is content model as we think about it today, actually what we'll be thinking about 3 to 4 years. And then the kind of example I use, and I think I mentioned this before the call, was Sean Grove from OpenAI gave this great speech talking about kind of what they call the model spec. And the metaphor he used was really from a web development or actually software development perspective. But like if you developed an application, compiled it, and then threw away all the source code, that's how people are operating in AI today. So the spec, what you might call the prompt, but really we're talking context engineering. It's much more than a prompt. But it really, the spec that goes into generating something, the definition, the PRD, whatever you want to call it, once you have that, then it can generate the code or the experience, right? So what's more important, is it the output or the input? And what they argue at OpenAI, at least, is that the input is really what drives engineering. There's that saying, the English language is the new development language, right? But being able to explain or define something in human understandable, readable words is actually what generates those experiences. And I take that back to content management, which is when you talk about repository and talk about spec, maybe it's really the context and the rule sets that become really important from a organizational content generation and management perspective, as opposed to the content model or even the storage of the content.
I would argue that the content model is part of that. And what I did in the follow-up article to the Queen Bee article is I did that experiment where I created that SQLite database and gave it very, very strict rules on what was what. And that was my old boss down at Optimizely, Kevin Lee. He made a great statement that I enjoyed where he says, so essentially your content model is your context. So content model is context, is what he said. And what I found as I did the experiment was that the content model wasn't enough, because when I asked the AI to create a UI for it, it created a UI like I wanted to manage like the fields, and it created like a PHP MyAdmin type UI. It created a UI like a SQL Server Studio UI, which is not what I wanted. So I had to create like an English language version of this is what this is intended to be done, and these are kind of how I want to work with it. But those two things together, the content model and kind of description of what I wanted to do, that fundamentally became the context. And I then fed that into AI in, I think, 6 different places to create 6 different applications based on the common kind of queen bee aspect of this being the data that I want to manage. But I remember back in the beginning of AI, very briefly, there was the context of a prompt engineer. Everybody was going to be a prompt engineer. And that, thankfully, that blew out pretty quick, because we realized it's not so much the prompt as it is like the larger context is managing the context, and the prompt is applied to that context. But it's a fascinating philosophical exercise. Is it the output that matters, or the input? Is it the seed that grows the tree, or is it the tree itself? And this is where I was when I wrote those articles. I believe the content model and some English language description of how you want to use that content, that's the context, that's the input. You put that into various engines, and the output, and this is an overstatement, but the output can be disposable. Again, that's an overstatement. You don't want to be throwing away things willy-nilly, but I can generate a UI for me. You can generate a UI for you. Everybody can have their UI. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, as long as they're obeying by the rules of the repository and the model. And that's where I draw the line.
So I'm going to misquote this article I read recently, but it was from one of the big VC firms. They put these thought leadership articles out there, but the title of the article was the AI UI problem isn't what you think it is. And so the AI UI problem is that the user interface for AI is a prompt, right? It's a chat window. And that, those of us who've built enterprise software for the past 20 years, it's not what we think about as a user interface. But what they're arguing is that it's actually the UI isn't the issue. People are missing the point is that the underlying logic behind it is what differentiates the product. So we take like code generation tools like Lovable, Cursor, Bolt, right? Replit, I think they use as an example. Each of these solves the same problem in very different ways. And it has to do with the way the logic engine works. Like one of them is built for basically eliminating choice, right? You're using their common stack, using Tailwind and TypeScript, and this is the database, right? It's more of kind of the, Bolt or Lovable model. Whereas Cursor is really built for developers and give them choice of anything they want to use. And it, or Cloud Code is really great at basically analyzing large code bases, brownfield code bases, and finding the patterns and the content, right? So even though each of those has the same user interface primarily, it's the logic behind that differentiates the product. That's what defines the software. I wonder if you agree with that, and if you think how that kind of applies to the CMS we'll be talking about in the future.
I do agree with that partially. I certainly think it's the logic of the engine that really defines it, but it's also the data it's been trained on. It's not only the logic, but it's the training data behind it, the domain of data that it looked at to come up with its answer. So yeah, I partially agree with that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing to me, I guess, would be like the stripping away of what we would consider a content management interface. You were talking about generating your own interfaces, and that's something that I had this epiphany, I don't know, a year ago or two. But originally we had desktop software. We kind of all remember that. We installed the software on the desktop. It starts to make a bit of a comeback, actually. But the then the browser became the new desktop, the new interface, right? And all software ran in the browser. To me, it feels like a lot of software runs in the LLM now. Like it generates interfaces directly in the LLM for you to work with, or it can build artifacts and front ends. And, so it's more of kind of this, protean interface, right?
I have a lot of books, and I store my books in Airtable.
Yeah.
I have an Airtable database that I created. And I have 1,500 books. I think I had 1,100 here in the office, but I have 1,500 books in Airtable. And they just added, like everyone else, they added AI tools. And so when I want to go change, I finished a book this morning, and I need to go find the record and change the status to read, and change and set the date read. Like those are the two things I have to do when I read a book. Mm-hmm. Well, now I can just go to AI and say, what was it? I finished the book, How Hackers Win, this morning. And then I hit enter, and Airtable's AI will go find that record and change those two fields for me. So that goes back to exactly what you were saying. Fundamentally, my UI now is a sentence. That's become my UI to the product. Now, to be honest, that was a neat party trick. I don't use that normally because I'm always freaked out it's going to do something wrong. So I still go do it manually just because I'm old and resistant to change, I think. Right. But yeah, that's really, that app has become a prompt effectively.
I mean, I'd say that 50% of my interactions with tools like CRM and CMS, I do using MCP now. I don't even log into the application to do that. And, part of it is because it becomes more of like an orchestration play, right? Where I'm trying to do something with the data, either putting it in or putting it out. Like I do all my content development in Cursor. For instance, I've got rules set up, I have templates set up, I have context, backgrounder, all of that stuff. A lot of people are doing that in, Cloud projects, things like that. But either way, once I generate a piece of content, then I'll submit it to the CMS and update content, via the API. If I'm pulling, like, let's say, show me the last 5 leads we've had this campaign, and then I can, take that information. I can write a follow-up or a message, or, kind of recapitalize the campaign with new assets based on the information coming from the CRM. So it's kind of like this interplay between AI, context, systems, and integration that I find gets kind of unlocked working in that kind of an interface.
But I want to say, when you were just talking about giving us our last 5 contacts or something we did, that only makes sense because your CRM system or whatever you're using has a strong content model behind it. That only makes sense because that content model describes that content, and that content, as Kevin, my former boss, said, that content model fundamentally becomes part of the context to have that AI engine understand that. And so that's why that works. It's the context that helps AI understand what the content means. It understands that my last name is Barker because it's in a field that's called last name.
Right.
And so I go back to my point, which I made in the Queen Bees article, is that content models are fundamentally context, and allowing an AI engine to use that context to change that context. Gosh, I don't know where that leaves us. I don't know if I've actually done that or not. That gets recursively weird in a lot of ways. So I don't know. I still draw the line at the content model. Nobody's persuaded me that I'm wrong there yet.
I have generated new content models, from MCP. And I've had a couple of problems with it. Sometimes the model isn't really exactly the way that I'd want to create it. The other issue I've had is that sometimes it will actually not see there's already a content model there, and then duplicate that, which is a mortal sin, right? But then you always have to remember, like, today is the worst AI will ever be.
Is that true though, Dave? Is that
Hmm.
true? Because I have often wondered if AI might be the best it ever is today. And I say that because we might be out of training data. And I'm curious what happens when AI starts training itself on AI generated content. Um, I wonder. We just came out of an AI winter, right? There was nothing going on in AI for the longest time, and then somebody came up with a GPT model, and we burst out of this AI winter into this new amazing reality that we're in now. We'll have another winter. The question is when that's going to come. And right now, we're making great advancements in the underlying engines and the underlying models, but there's also a lot of advancements in kind of the UI and the application around those engines and models. There will be a point where I think the engines and the models plateau for a while. We enter another winter. You just saw with ChatGPT 5.
Yeah, I was thinking of that myself.
Yeah, nobody liked it. I didn't mind. It's still a hell of a lot smarter than I am, but maybe that's the truth. Maybe 6 will be even more underwhelming and we'll enter some new winter. And would that be so bad? I mean, my God, I mean, society needs a chance to like take a breath and figure out what the hell we're doing.
Yes.
So maybe an AI winter would be a welcome thing for a little while. But again, that's me being middle-aged and crabby.
So whenever you say anything, Deane, there's always so much to unpack. In what you say.
I like words. I don't.
Yeah. When you started talking, GPT-5 jumped in my head. And I actually liked GPT-5. I thought it was a nice release. I particularly like the pricing. It's great to see a step back in new model. But I think that people complained about GPT-5 because it didn't have enough personality. Okay, maybe that's the case, whatever. The thing that was maybe alarming about GPT-5 is it wasn't a quantum leap. And we're so used to, you kind of country mouse, your city mouse, right? We're used to the city mouse. We're used to life changing at a fast pace. And when we don't get that, we're maybe a little disappointed in the dopamine hit of advancement. It wasn't earth shattering. There wasn't anything, fundamentally that changed our worldview in GPT-5. It was just an incrementally bit better model. The training piece is fine, except for I don't think foundational training is really where the action is right now anyways. Like the foundation models, I think they have as much information as they need. It's really about I'd say the custom data. We talked about the context or what you can train it on from your own information. And we do a lot of work in technical documentation management and delivery, and that's kind of high aces when it comes to content structure and training and knowledge and repository. So we're seeing a lot of advancements in how people are leveraging that data and using graph or vector and all those kinds of things. So there's a lot of ground left to make up in enterprise knowledge and custom business workflows. I kind of think about AI a little bit. I use this metaphor. It's like you want a large sail and a deep keel. What I mean by that is a lot of people are building AI products and they build all this interface.
I live in South Dakota, Dave. I live in South Dakota, so your sailing metaphors are completely lost on me.
Yeah. Okay. This is a Seattle metaphor. But what I mean by a large sail is you want to be able to harness the innovation and the speed of change from AI. And a deep keel is you want stability. So you want the ship to be upright. You don't want it being knocked over in the wind, right? And basically what I'm saying is when you're building software for AI, get out of the way when it comes to the wind, right? You don't want to be building interfaces and front ends that define that interaction. But focus on your keel, focus on the depth of the knowledge and information that you can put into those models, the context, to make them more accurate, more performant, following your business rules and logic, protecting your data, staying out of training. So
this goes back to what I was saying before. I mean, my deep keel is the content model.
It is, yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that protects my content, because like, if you're not going to protect your model, then you're not protecting your content. A model that can be changed is a model that's not protecting your content anyway. If someone can delete the title field and all the data in it, then what do you really have? Do you really have content? I mean, the argument for versioning in CMS, right? The idea that when you change content, you're not going to overwrite the prior version, but you're going to save a new version alongside it. The idea for versioning was born from the idea that the power to edit is the power to delete. Because even if you can't delete it, if you can edit it, you can just wipe everything out and replace it with a profanity, and you've effectively deleted it. And so essentially, the power to change your content model is the power to destroy all your content. I can't delete all your content, but I can remove all the fields from your content objects. I go back to, it's inviolate. Your content models have to be well defended and well described. Well described so they can be context for your AI engines, and well defended so that you can allow your AI engines to operate on those models and still sleep at night.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would kind of come back to the idea of just classes of content. So repeatable content models are, cannot change. They're immutable. But there's a whole lot of free-form content. And then the reality is that if you look at a lot of CMS products, really what you get is structured content, WYSIWYG, CData, structured content. And really, 80% of the action is in the unstructured content block, which, that's something I kind of run into a lot. I mean, let's say you're generating a blog post and you want to put a really cool table that you created with AI in there, right? Well, how do you get that, really cool structured table into that blog post, but it's going into some tiny MCE editor or whatever else, And that's kind of where I start thinking like, okay, well, I kind of rather have AI just do the whole thing at that point. Like, I think it just kind of, as much as we always talk about structured content, reusable content, there's a whole lot of content out there, which is CData.
You keep using CData, which reveals our collective age, Dave. A lot of younger people are listening to this podcast and saying, "What the hell is CData?"
Yeah.
CData, for the record, is the ability to basically drop anything in the middle of an XML document.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's overuse of kind of rich text. There's overuse of rich text in CMS today. And I think applying AI to that is certainly not going to make that better.
And then why is there overuse of that rich text? It's because people want the freedom to put whatever they want.
See, you're leading me down the garden path, Dave, is what you're doing here. I do get that. I mean, there's overuse of that because people can't easily change their models. You know what you're doing, Dave, is you're talking me into my two-stage content model theory. What you're doing. And you're basically daring me to write a super long blog post about this.
The gauntlet has been laid.
Does it have to be a two-stage content model, though? Because can't you just instruct the AI to say, these are parts of the content model you can't touch?
Sure.
You can touch this stuff.
You could do it on permissions today. I mean, there are a lot of systems. I don't know if Ingeniux does it. I know like Sitecore and Optimizely will allow you to prevent, you can put permissions around the modifications of certain fields. And so you could do it with permissions now. Just the AI connects to the system with a user account that doesn't allow it to modify fields. But Barb, to be fair, you've described a two-stage model in theory, if not architecture.
Yeah.
We have permissions, but we also actually added AI help text to our schema properties as well, which is kind of interesting. So for generating metadata and things like that, being able to pass through instructions of how that should be formatted or what the rules are around it.
So AI is generating that information?
No, I mean the editor or the person creating the data model can add like basically AI instructions to the field.
Oh, this is great. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the follow-up to the Queen Bee's post. This was my problem because I was trying to use a pure data model, by which I mean a SQL DDL file. Like I exported the structure of the database to SQL and fed it into AI. I was trying to use that as a content model, and AI was giving me things that legally conform to that, but not in the way I wanted them to.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned previously, it didn't give me like an interface to create a blog post. It gave me an interface to manage a database record. So what you're saying, Dave, is that I could add like a freeform note to every column to say, this is what this column should be used for. It's funny because I thought about doing that. I thought, what I need to do in terms of SQLite is I need to create a meta table, and that meta table would have a description of every field in the other tables. And then I would use that meta table to generate some description that I would then feed into AI. So I think it's fantastic that Ingeniux is allowing that. I think that is absolutely the right way to go. You're fundamentally creating a more richly described content model and a richer level of context for AI. So kudos for doing that. That was exactly where my mind went on the problem as well.
Yeah. No, because we've built all these AI-driven metadata generation tools and things like that. So they have to know the context of, how many characters can go into a meta description or title field, or, how is this taxonomy object used, right?
So that's the key, what you just said at the end there. The earlier part where you're saying like how many characters go into that, I was able to do that in like SQL check constraints. So I was able to do that at the kind of data model level. But the second thing you said about like, this is how this taxonomy node is going to be used.
Right.
There's two levels of describing content. It's how the data is going to be stored. It's also how the data is going to be used. Now, a data model, in my experiment was with SQLite, but with any CMS could generate like validation rules. You can say this is how the data is going to be stored, but the AI engine has no idea how you intend to use the data, like how you intend to use it in the future, because that story hasn't been written yet. What you're basically doing, Dave, is allowing people to put AI notes into their content model.
Right.
You're allowing them to write a future story of usage. And that's explaining to an AI engine, this is how this person intends to use this. It's not enough just to know that you can't have more than 30 characters in this field. It needs to know what you plan to do with that field in the future. You're letting that person write a story of the future, which is what an AI engine needs to fully understand that content model.
Right. It's not so much the what, it's the why.
Right. Barb, I feel like we've completely wandered away from any agenda.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, completely.
I'm gonna give you, with 16 minutes to go, I'm gonna give you the opportunity to insert another question.
Yes, good, because I was gonna yell at you both if you didn't let me. So I do want to pull it back a little bit, because we're talking about that content model. What does the future of the CMS look like? Like Webflow just announced a code gen tool. You can build applications with a prompt. Content Stack is saying content management is dead and it's all about context management. So all these, most of these CMSs are talking about the front end experience, and they're not talking about this back end management of content models and all the stuff that goes with that. Are we looking at a separation? Like what does the CMS or the digital experience platform, whatever you want to call it, what does that look like in the near future? Are we going to see the tools separate and become two different types of tools altogether. And if that's true, what stays with the content model and the management of the content model? What are the features and functionalities of a system that just manages that?
I work for Staffbase, and at Staffbase, we're in the intranet space, making intranet and internal communications product. And we have a different usage model than kind of marketing-based CMSs, right? We're not on brand reinforcement or anything like that. We're fundamentally on communication and retrieval of information. Employees need to know information; they need it quickly. And we've often wondered, like, what is the internet of the future? And we have taken that question to its utter absurd extreme and said, does the internet of the future even exist? Is it fundamentally just interaction with an AI engine? Now, for us, this question at Staffbase, this question is a little more directed because our usage patterns are very task-based. You go to an intranet to find out what the dress code is, or where you should park your car, or what a particular policy is, or whatever. Very task-based information. When you're looking at more kind of brand reinforcement information, it's not just about accessing data, it's about setting a mood. It's about curating an experience, curating content to get somebody to have a certain reaction or a certain feeling or change something in somebody's head. We have a, not 100% sure I'm allowed to talk about this, but we have an AI powered system at the moment that's currently in pilot testing, which enables the system to know what you have seen on the internet and what you haven't seen on the internet, and then deliver you a curated piece of media. I'm being very vague here purposely. Deliver you a piece of media that you can consume that basically will catch you up to date. And that's an example of kind of a curated experience. And so is that the future of AI? It's just a prompt to get information that you want, and then it's curated AI generated media products to give you the information that you don't have. And I go back, I'm going to quote Donald Rumsfeld. I don't know how many of you, Barb, you're Canadian. I don't know if you know who.
I know who he is, yeah.
Okay. He was Secretary of Defense during the first Gulf War. And he made a very famous statement that everybody laughed at the time, but was really, really smart. He was talking about what they knew and what they didn't know. And he made the statement, he said, there are known knowns and there are unknown unknowns. There are known unknowns and there are unknown unknowns. A known unknown is something we don't know, but we know don't know it. An unknown unknown is something we don't know and we don't even know it exists. The example I've always used is, if you ask me what the chemical symbol is for boron, that to me is a known unknown. I know it exists. I know how to find it, but I couldn't tell you what it is. If you ask a 5-year-old what the chemical symbol for boron is, they don't even know what you're talking about. That's an unknown unknown. And so AI is great. Like a prompt is really great at helping you find the answer to known unknowns. I know the dress code exists. I know it's out there. Just give it to me. But if something is unknown to me, if it's an unknown, I don't even know to ask AI for it. If the north parking lot is being resurfaced next week and I shouldn't park there, how can I ask AI about that? Do I just make sure I ask AI every single week about parking? No, that's an unknown unknown. I need AI to curate that experience for me. I need it to know that this is a thing that I need to know, and I have not consumed this information, and I drive a car and I have a car registered with security. And so this is a thing I need to know. And so I think the future, and this goes back to where we were with CMS personalization 10 years ago, right? The future is going to be deeply personalized, curated experiences driven by AI to communicate unknown unknowns to people. I don't know. That was a lot of words, Dave. Tell me if it made sense.
I love that. I think it's, it's a really interesting approach because what's the repository of the unknown unknown, right? I mean, and then I have this kind of saying, it's like, humans aren't in the loop, they are the loop. Because what's the purpose of content, right? Content is a package of information that you share between humans, right? Data may be a package of information you share between machines, but content ultimately is communication. So how do you enable the AI to communicate information to humans in ways that humans need that information? I think HR is a great example. I mean, certainly there's a kind of GPT model where you can ask anything to the AI and get the information from the handbook or whatever, that you don't have to go and bother somebody for. But it's the information that you don't know to ask, which is really the problem. And take that back to web experience. I mean, first of all, when it comes to all this stuff, GEO, AEO, answer engine optimization, web experience, nobody actually really knows what the future is. And some people, we don't really know how half of it works, right? We do know what the limitations are of the current models. And the fact is that AI today is a goldfish, right? It has a very short memory. Once you fill up that context window, then you're basically back to ground zero. And ultimately, kind of taking this back to where we started, the role of the CMS to me is about managing the context, not only within a digital or web project, but across an organization. Because most of these AI models break down when you actually start bringing in multiple people. And so when you talk about context, you're talking about what's the voice of the company, what's the brand style of the company, what is the content models or definitions of the company, what content do we already have, what content are we creating in the future, where does this information live, where do our templates live, where do our brand voices live? And then ultimately it comes to context engineering, because you're trying to keep it down to about 170,000 tokens at one time, so you have enough runway to actually execute your tasks and you don't start degenerating your AI. So there's a lot of practical things, and I've done a lot of work kind of in that area, just experimenting, writing MD files like agent.md or claude.md files to, these are my templates and these are the line 1 through 300 is this template, and basically trying to save the AI from grokking and finding that code and using sub-agents to do that, to keep your context window clean. All of those kind of things is today where we're at. And it's, I also use an analogy of that movie 50 First Dates. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but Billy Adam Sandler's, finds his woman of his dreams and realizes she has a memory problem every day. She wakes up and she doesn't remember anything. That's what life is like working with AI today, right? It's like every time you start a new session, you're basically starting at zero context. You got to reload that context, reintroduce yourself to it. So there's definitely market space for content applications that can manage that context in ways that fit today's models.
I know we could call them context management systems, and there's an acronym that we're already super happy with. It's the new CMS, Dave. It's just context management.
The other thing is, if it's really just a repository, right? If we're trying to let's just get the CMS out of the way and let's let the AI do everything. And I get closer and closer to wanting to work with bare metal. It's like I don't even want to work in the application space half the time anymore. But then is a CMS just Git, right? And do I just have a bunch of MD files with all of my context, or is there really a role for the digital experience platform? The Adobe of AI, right?
I feel like right now, it's like we're in the early days of social media. I remember Facebook came out in 2007 or whatever, and 2005 or something, and everybody branded themselves a social media expert. Nobody knew where this was going. I mean, Facebook isn't even remotely the same as it was when it first launched. And so I'm cynical about AI experts at the moment, because it's moving too fast for any human to keep up with it. And the end of the story hasn't been written and we don't know where it's going. So in terms of skill sets with AI, my advice is just to be flexible and adapt as much as possible, and hang on.
Large sale, deep field.
There you go.
So
there you go. Barb, we came full circle.
Yeah. So is that what you're saying for tech professionals who are experts in content management systems, what should they be thinking about? Is it more the front end experience with the context, and or the people that are more content model, content strategy, professionals? What's the role for them going forward in the CMS?
Dave, I love your large sail, deep keel analogy, even though I'm literally 1,000 miles from any ocean. That resonates with me quite a bit because I think I wrote a blog post several months ago called The Art of Gist Management. And the art of the future is going to be getting the machine meaning AI, to understand the gist of what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the gist management was a very early term for what eventually became context management, right?
Yeah.
Getting you to understand. Like with my experiment with my SQLite database, the gist was being able to describe that database in such a way that AI understood it. So I think fundamentally, the skill of the future is going to be able to teach the machine. I mean, to what extent can you teach the machine?
Yeah. And then how do you work as a large enterprise to do that at scale across multiple touch points with the things that make your organization unique? And, that's actually the hardest thing for any company to ever do, is define their uniqueness and their brand voice and their positioning, right? And to do it at scale. So it's going to be kind of the content management challenge of the next generation, is that content strategy can't be taken for granted anymore. Content strategy is actually, it's, the model spec of really customer interaction and growth. And, it's actually going to be super fun and exciting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all these questions being defined and content models, and I love the two-stage concept. And
Dave, you and I have both been on the internet for a very, very long time. And I remember when we were first on the internet, we were desperate to try to lock down web pages so that they looked right and they looked the same.
Oh, yeah.
And then responsive web design came along. And we had to realize that our designs, our pages, were going to be poured into different visual containers.
Mm-hmm.
They were going to be poured into mobile devices, and they were going to be poured into tablets. And we had to be able to flex those and make sure that the point came through, if not the pixel perfect placement.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are with AI. AI is a cognitive container. We need to understand that our content is going to be poured into different cognitive containers, meaning computational units of understanding. It might be a human brain, it might be an AI engine. And much like the designer who had to make sure that the gist of the design came through no matter what visual container was poured into, the content strategist of the future needs to make sure that the idea, the message behind their content comes through no matter what cognitive container that content is poured into. And that is going to be the art of gist management and the art of being able to teach the machine.
That's, you just nailed it right there, because the biggest paradigm shift between AI and before AI is that AI is not a deterministic technology, right? You don't put X in and you get Y out, right? You might get Y, you might get Z, you might get M, So it's, you can't, if you're not controlling the output, you better damn well control the input, right? Because that's the piece that you're going to be able to really manage that voice.
Yep.
So Barb, I think we should finish on Dave saying that I nailed it.
Yeah.
I love that's a great way to close. Dave admitting that I nailed it.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, thank you both for being with me today. I appreciate it. I think lots of stuff to think about with the way content management is changing and what AI is kind of bringing to the table. So it's been an interesting conversation.
And now I'm going to go write a long blog post on two-stage content models. So
I will make sure to link your two blog posts into the show notes too, so people can kind of read those.
Yeah, those are must read.
Context. So thank you. And I want to thank our sponsor Ingeniux for the hosting and sponsoring the Content Matters podcast. Ingeniux helps companies make content easier to create, manage, and deliver so customers can find the answers they need. And Discover CX by Ingeniux is built for teams to deliver customer portals, help docs, success sites, so you can write your content once, reuse it everywhere, pull it together from different sources, publish it to all the different channels people look for technical communications. And it's built with built-in XML authoring, AI, customer portal, and headless delivery. Lots of stuff we talked about here today. Everything you need to keep your content clear, consistent, easy to find. And I would encourage everyone who's listening to check out ingeniux.com and discovercx.com to learn more about Ingeniux's platform and their products. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. We keep you up to date on what's going on with the podcast. Colleen Jones, Carrie Hain, the wonderful Robert Rose are wrapping up my season 7. So it's really been a great year, and it's going to be a great last few months. So with that, thank you. Thank you, Deane. Thank you, David. I appreciate it. And everyone, have a great day.
Thanks, Barb. That's great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.